Now, the big change that we're going to be seeing from the list is that top left card that we see. It is Drake Hatcher in the main instead of Monastery Swiftspear. So David's choice in this configuration is trying to be a little bit slower, a more mid-rangey style, and that usually is the advantage player, as Swiftspear can be good, but both players are playing a lot of Torch the Towers, that kind of thing. So Drake Hatcher ends up being the really, really impressive card. Let's look at the sideboard here from David and see some of the cards we have here. Another Vivi in the sideboard, which we could easily see being brought in, as well as that Abrade to be able to deal with Quarry Steel Cutters. Outside of that, feels like we're really pretty much ready to go in the main deck. So let's take a look at David's opponent here. Look at Tony's list, and yeah, once again, top left is where I want to focus your attention. That is the Swiftspears here. So Tony is going to be trying to go a little bit faster. A little bit of a problem with that, as Tony will be on the draw here in this match, as David was the higher seed. So slight advantage, I would say, to David, but let's look at Tony's sideboard, see if we got anything extra going on here. Not a ton as well. We do have that one Abrade as well. You can bring in more removal spells in the Rolling Furnace if you really want to, like that, but I would give the slight advantage to David on this one.
And we've talked about already here at the desk how important it is to be on the play in these matches.
Competitive magic and positive results, but only one is going to get to move on to our semifinals, and we're going to find out who it's going to be starting right now.
Good luck, guys.
A Spire Bluff Canal and a Storm Chaser's Talon is how Rude will get his day started.
Yeah, looking at Tony's hand, I believe that's a sleight of hand, a Quarry Steel Cutter, and a Stock Up alongside quite a few lands. So in a position where is representing the more impressive threat in the Quarry Steel Cutter, assuming there isn't one from David, but definitely considering he is the one with Monastery Swiftspears, the more reactive hand at the moment.
This is a Quarry Steel Cutter for Tony before passing the turn back. David off to a very nice start there with the Storm Chaser's Talent and a copy of Drake Hatcher. We'll see what the third turn does yield, and it's going to start things off with an Opt. So there will be one Prowess trigger there for both of those creatures. The top card here for Rude may remain the top card. We will find out here in just a moment as David does consult his hand. And that top card will stay on top. So David is happy with what he saw with the blue instant.
Yeah, I think for David, if he does have access to a monstrous rage here to get that attack for 6 that we've seen so many times before with Drake Hatcher, getting those 6 incubation counters, that would be the dream. But as things stand, I do believe that he may be looking for a third land here, very aggressive.
Well, kept with both of those Ops, so it appears as though happy with what he has found on each. Spire Bluff Canal is the land. Will there be a play afterward? There will not be. So looks like 6 damage will come across. Some incubation counters are headed Drake Hatcher's way. And that looks like it may be it for Rude.
You know, a relatively understated turn as far as things go.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
I think Tony is pretty happy if he can get away from that turn where he just played Quarry Steel Cutter and passed, not taking that much damage out of the situation and only seeing one potential Drake being made from David.
Well, it's time for Tony to actually make some relevant game actions. And the first one is going to be a sleight of hand, as he needs to get onto this battlefield here. And it looks like Rude has paused Tony for just a moment, and now the sleight of hand will resolve. So Opt and another copy of sleight of hand is what Portland is looking at and choosing from with the sorcery.
David potentially representing a Into the Floodmaw, saying that maybe with the sleight of hand on the stack before you're able to dig deeper, I want to try to bounce this Quarry Steel Cutter. A bit of a risky play considering the amount of instancy spells that are available to the Izzet Prowess deck. Maybe considering just activating the Drake Hatcher, but as things stand, it could also just be a bluff, just taking the advantage opportunity to tell Tony, okay, this is one aspect of things that you have to think about, is maybe I have this.
The follow-up is a copy of Into the Floodmaw. That's going to trigger Quarry Steel Cutter. And looking to bounce that otter, and that is going to work out just fine there for Tony. So starting to get on the battlefield in a meaningful way. And now we'll simply pass the turn back with a mountain at the ready. Let's see if Drake Hatcher wants to make a Drake on the end step. Looks like the answer is yes here for Rude. So there's the 2-2 flyer. And David will be untapping very quickly and drawing a card. Don't have a great look at Rude's hand at this stage of things, but we do know that a couple of ops kept the cards on top last turn. So you have to imagine that Rude is setting up for a pretty big turn here. And 2 mana, well, not a bad place to start. How many? Excuse me.
Yeah, Corey Steelcutter definitely being the ideal way to start things off here from David. And for Tony, the hand is really offering no help. As much as he would like to posture, I believe it's 2 lands as well as a stock up and a sleight of hand. So really doing nothing in this scenario. And if David reads this and says, I have free reign to do whatever I want here, which is essentially how things are playing out, then this is just going to continue putting Tony on the back foot. And we don't see any of those 1-mana interaction spells that typically stabilize things in this Izzet Prowess mirror.
Well, you saw that copy of this town ain't big enough. Going to bounce the Monk token that Tony did have. Also going to bounce the copy of Storm Chaser's Talent that David owned. And now you see a whole bunch of damage coming through here.
Yeah, just confirming that we have the damage correct, putting Tony down to 6 and 3 more incubation counters on the Drake Hatcher, plus a hand of spells, especially with that Storm Chaser's Talent that we do know about, means that David can continue putting pressure on next turn, and it's not going to take much more pressure to put this game away.
Well, there's a copy of Vivi. And we have saw many times over the course of this weekend that if one does have the opportunity to untap with Vivi, life is pretty good. I'm not sure Tony's going to get that opportunity, though. In the meantime, it is a sleight of hand, which means Vivi will grow a little bit into a 1/4 and deal a point of damage, and there will also be a Monk token from the Corey Steelcutter. Tony, fingers crossed, able to get through this turn.
Into the Floodmaw is a 1-mana interaction spell. Tony is essentially limited to that 1 piece of mana, but the problem is there's more trouble on the board than just 1 permanent. So yes, you can use this into the Floodmaw, and you do have to use it now because of Vivi's ability only being activatable during your turn. But that means that essentially Tony is saying, I have nothing. I have no mana. I have no ability to interact. So for David, it is purely a mathematical question at this point. And a lot of the time, that is the trivial part as the Izzet Prowess player.
So Drake made on the end step via the Drake Hatcher there for Rude once again. And now David is doing a little bit of math to see if there's a way that he can finish the game off on this turn, especially with the Vivi on the battlefield. We all know that Tony's at 6, just like David does, so going to kick things off with a copy of Storm Chaser's Talent. That will trigger Prowess for the Drake Hatcher and the Monk. There's your Otter. The follow-up is another Storm Chaser's Talent. So another Otter. And now a Corey Steelcutter will trigger, and there's the Monk. Next up,
I believe
into
one
the
removal
Floodmaw.
spell does it.
And that will do it indeed. David Rue is going to win game number 1 here over Tony Portolan. The Izzet Prowess mirror, at least thus far, goes to the Pro Tour Atlanta champion as we get ready here for game number 2. Tony on the play this time around. Going to need to be a lot more proactive, especially with those Swift Spears in the deck.
Yeah,
tie this up.
Absolutely. This is the second of the pre-board games before we swap to post-sideboard after this one. And I think one of the things that is going to be real important for Tony is how he's going to break serve in this matchup, considering he both has the more aggressive build of the deck and the disadvantage of being the lower seed. At some point, he's going to have to win a game on the draw, and if he loses this, that's going to be a really difficult battle.
It is indeed. As here's another copy of Storm Chaser's Talent, another Otter on the way. The one that's in play will become a 2/2. Oh, no. Oh, I have bad news. I already had bad news when it was a Shivan Reef to start, thinking it may be a one-lander.
Hold on.
We'll see if the bad news is enough. It's just a Thundering Falls. Okay. I was a little scared there for Tony.
Yeah, I think the existence of the tap land meant that all of these plays were going to play out exactly the same way as if there was no land. And fortunately for Tony, getting the Thundering Falls, here, means that he does in fact have a game ahead of him.
Looks like he's going to leave on top with the Surveil trigger from the Thundering Falls, and we're going to head back David's way. This is a sleight of hand, trigger the prowess on the otter. Take a look at the top two. Sleight of hand among those two cards, so we'll see what Ruud does want to select here in just a moment.
Yeah, I think the ideal for David here is having access to a land plus either Torch to the Tower or a copy of Into the Flood mod, just to deal with one of these otters and make sure that he's not taking too much damage out of a potentially explosive turn from Tony. Something like a Quarry Steel Cutter into an interaction spell would be a lot of damage potentially being presented.
That's a mountain, and Ruud will simply pass the turn back. So we're heading back Tony's way. Explosive third turn maybe on the way here.
I do think I saw a third land in Tony's hand, and I do believe there was a sleight of hand. The only thing I don't know is whether there is that 2-mana Haymaker in the form of Quarry Steel Cutter to bring this all together.
Well, it looks like the answer is no, so at least for right now, we'll just see a sleight of hand. So a Monstrous Rage among those cards here for Tony. And one thing we have seen from these Prowess decks this weekend is a varying number of the very powerful red combat trick. Some players electing to go with 4, some with maybe a little 2-2 split, 2 of those, 2 copies of Wild Ride, but it does still exist in the deck, just in varying numbers.
Yeah, there's incredible variation between the 4 Izzet Prowess decks that we have in the top 8. It does feel like each of them have chosen a slightly different flavor, whether it is 4 Drake Hatchers, whether it is Monastery Swiftspear, whether it is Wild Ride versus not, how many VVs you have. Everybody feels like they have a different approach to the deck and how they feel like they are best answering the metagame at large.
2-2 Prowess Otters at the moment. Looks like there's a Swiftspear. Follow up is another copy of Storm Chaser's Talent.
Sorry, 15.
As Tony's going to fall down to 15. Otters on the battlefield, at least the ones that can attack, they're 3/3s. And then Monastery Swiftspear is a 2/3.
Yeah, notably, one of the best ways we have seen people find success in the Izzet Prowess matchup against Prowess is just to go wide. And the only person that we've seen actually have any sort of preparation for that is, I believe, Christian Baker, who has a copy of Fire Magic in his sideboard.
Yes, indeed.
Everyone else, when they're looking at a wide board, they're thinking about how am I going to 1-for-1 answer things or how am I going to race, because those are your 2 options.
An Opt is going to make the top card the bottom one, so mystery card here for Ruud. And that might just be passing the turn. Well, that might just be passing the game because Tony is widening out quite a bit here and Ruud missed the land drop. So not an ideal start here for David and very much the opposite here for Tony, who is on the play and is going to try to continue to run downhill with another Swiftspear.
Yeah, I do think that Swiftspear was taken over a Monstrous Rage off the sleight of hand the previous turn, but it's not really going to end up mattering because you see exactly Tony's understanding of the matchup, which is go wide. And in that situation where David is struggling on hitting his land drops and continuing to develop, having the Monastery Swiftspears to push that extra hasty damage across compared to something like a Drake Hatcher coming down really did allow Tony to just force things faster than usual.
We are in game number 3, which is our first one, excuse me, here of our sideboarded games. We'll get to what these players have done here in just a moment, but you do see that Ruud is on the play with the Storm Chaser's Talent this time around. Tony's going to match it with one of his own, but remember, play draw disparity in this matchup is pretty big. We've seen both players run downhill when they are on the play, and we'll see if Ruud can keep that narrative going, as it will be an attack here for 1 to begin, and maybe a Drake Hatcher to follow up. Yes, indeed.
Yeah, I think you see both players really in the sideboarding are trying to become a little more reactive, not too much, of course, but cards like Lithomantic Barrage or Roaring Furnace coming in, and definitely recognizing that you can't afford to fully tap out for a 3-mana play like Vivi, so both players are taking out at least 1 copy of the Legend.
We prepare here for Tony's second turn of the game. We can let you know that he took out 1 copy of VV, along with 1 Monstrous Rage and 1 Spell Pierce, and has brought in an Abrade and 2 copies of Roaring Furnace. So some light sideboarding is on the draw this game, so that might be part of the reason that he has made the decisions that he has made. Meanwhile, on Ruud's side, 5 cards have come out in a VV, a Monstrous Rage, a copy of This Town Ain't Big Enough, and 2 copies of Stock Up. And in have come the Twin Maw Storm Brood, more importantly, Charring Bite aspect of that card. In a Braid, a Spell Pierce, and the aforementioned 2 copies of Lithomantic Barrage. So that's the setup for the players in this particular game. That will be an Into the Flood Maw on that Drake Hatcher. That's going to pump the Monastery Swift Spear and the Otter. So Tony will come in for 4, knocking Rude down to 16.
Yeah, the tempo gameplay definitely coming into effect here, and you can see the type of situation that would lead to David having sideboarded as he did, taking out copies of Stock Up and VV. We're on turn 3 here, where ideally you would be able to resolve one of those spells when your opponent is tapped out. But if you play VV and pass without casting a spell, that's a very vulnerable creature to something like Torch to the Tower. If you just tap out for Stock Up here while your opponent has 2 prowess creatures, you can take a lot of damage on the way back. So the dynamics of the matchup forcing you to be reactive when you are even behind by just 1 creature means that you can't really afford to tap out for those 3 mana spells as liberally as you would like. Ideally for David here, he would be able to deploy the Drake Hatcher again here, followed up with a 1-mana interaction spell of some kind, Torch to the Tower on the Swift Spear, or Into the Flood Maw on the Otter token. That would at least allow him to take the board back in his favor and try to stabilize things. But if there isn't that 1-mana follow-up, then a Drake Hatcher alone is not really going to be exciting enough here. Even if the follow-up is a sleight of hand or an opt, that's only a bit of damage being pushed through by this Otter.
Well, there's the Drake Hatcher, and Rude is just going to pass the turn back with a single mana up, which of course can represent a myriad of things. So we're going to head back Tony's way, see how he wants to play against Rude having up 1 mana and a little bit of a board presence that is prowess related. First things first here for Tony will be an opt. He'll wait patiently before resolving that spell because Spell Pierce does work itself into the equation in these sideboarded games. But the opt is going to resolve, so that top card here for Tony is going to become the bottom one. Mystery card coming.
That was a wild ride being drawn, so Tony has the ability to get aggressive a few turns into the future. At the moment, I believe Tony is just going to be also playing passively, just saying that if you are going to not use your mana fully, I'm going to try to develop with as much of my mana as I can, which is not that much. He missed the land drop there, but I'm going to force you to answer the board that I'm going wider and wider with, which was the strategy that Tony used in game 2.
Sleight of hand here from David Rude means that he has found the card that he is happy with. There are prowess triggers, of course. That's what the blue die does represent. 1 for the Otter and 1 for the Drake Hatcher. We'll see if there'll be more this particular turn.
I think one thing that Tony is really hoping for here is that there isn't a big haymaker from David right now. If this is just an attack where the Drake Hatcher is representing some amount of damage, but not that monstrous rage-fueled 6 damage, 6 incubation counters, now I'm able to go very wide and check your board. That is a decent feeling from Tony, even though he really does need to at least find that 3rd land in order to actually start putting some pressure on.
We were heading back Tony's way. He does ask how many cards does David have, and the answer is 3. And 2 mana available. Again, that can be quite a few different things. Here's a copy of Storm Chaser's Talon to get this turn started. That's going to resolve, so there is the Otter token once again.
And most importantly, that started off with a 3rd land. So
yes, indeed.
Tony can feel like he is now playing the game.
So, Storm Chaser's Talent once again, a 3rd Otter onto the battlefield. That's 2 prowess triggers and a pretty healthy attack here. Looks like Rude is going to analyze what happens when 6 damage comes across.
Yeah. And more importantly, what that 6 damage could turn into with something like a Monstrous Rage. Of course, both players are sideboarding out a copy of Monstrous Rage, but that is not all of their copies of Monstrous Rage.
Correct. Still leaving a couple in. Got to keep your opponent at least a little bit honest, right?
Yeah. And both of these players have played the matchup quite a bit this weekend. I think David Ruud, this is his third time playing the mirror match. He's 2-0. Tony Portolon played it 4 times in the Swiss, going 3-1, I believe, only losing to Ian Robb late into day 2, who, you know, a lot of people lost to Ian Robb this weekend.
This is true.
Yeah.
This is true. A Drake on the end step via the Drake Hatcher there for David Ruud means that he'll be starting this turn with a 2-2 flyer among those prowess creatures. And there is an island for the turn. Now, when 5 lands are on the battlefield, that means that something like Storm Chaser's talent level 2 can work itself into the equation, getting back sleight of hand or Torch the Tower.
Yeah, and we are approaching the point in the game now where David's sideboarding is looking a little worse.
Okay.
Once you get to 5 mana and suddenly you've cut 2 copies of Stock Up from your deck, that is the point where you really do want to find those 3 mana draw spells, just because you have the mana to interact as well afterwards. So there is an inflection point where when you're on 3 lands, Stock Up not looking good. Once you're on 5 or 6, suddenly you really want it back.
Looks like Drake Hatcher and the Drake will come across. No effects. Damage is going to come through. Tony's going to fall down to 10. 1 incubation counter on the 1-3. And now here will be Storm Chaser's talent getting back towards the tower. And David will pass the turn up with a very obvious removal spell and a prowess trigger for his 2 creatures.
Yeah, so 2 blockers and 1 removal spell. But now Tony has pseudo free reign, essentially, by knowing about what is happening there. And if David fires off this Torch to the Tower aggressively here and Tony has a Monstrous Rage, that's disaster. So something that I think David will have to play conservatively and hold back.
You see David taking a long look at the hand here. Let's see what this is going to be. In response to Stock Up, that will be a Torch to the Tower. Looks like it'll be on the Otter token. Okay. So that'll take care of that, and now the Stock Up will resolve. So a couple of lands alongside an Opt and into the Flood Maul, and another copy of Stock Up here for Tony to select from.
Yeah, this is the big issue, of course, with firing off that Torch to the Tower now is Tony has free reign, can do the math, can decide whether I am aggressively using this into the Flood Maw to get rid of this Drake Hatcher and push more damage across or not. If he does have a copy of Monstrous Rage, he can use it on a blocked creature here. So still definitely a bad situation for David, as he has essentially put the shields down. The question is, and I believe there's only 1 card left in his hand, what is he able to do with the remaining resources? Because if he's not able to push lethal across the next turn, and Tony is chaining Stock Ups here, the game is over.
Here's into the Flood Maw. Going to bounce the Drake Hatcher. All these prowess creatures are
3 power.
3 power. Can David dare go down to 1 in this situation? Maybe try to kill with a counterattack of some sort? Well, I got that question answered very quickly. He doesn't believe that's true. So he'll chump block, fall down to 4.
Yeah, I think it really depends on what David's hand is, because if he doesn't have a removal spell, I don't think he can actually deal with another attack regardless of whether he's at 4 or 1. So it's possible that he may have needed to play for lethal. Of course, that depends. We don't have the full hand information. We know there's a Drake Hatcher in that hand and some number of unknown cards. But it is really a matter of, is my only hope trying to go for the kill? And that is a big ask, considering, again, Monstrous Rages have been sided out here in the post-board game.
And I think our question has been answered here very quickly, as it's just a Drake Hatcher and a passing of the turn back. So can't imagine that David's hand is terribly strong at this stage of things. Not a guarantee, of course, but it sure does seem tough. As now here's a copy of Vivi.
Yeah, this is massive for Tony because he's on the verge of breaking serve, as we mentioned previously. This is the game where he was on the draw. He was the lower seed, so if everything went according to plan, it would have been play, draw, play, draw, play for David, and he could have won a set in 5. So Tony winning this one means that he has taken the advantage firmly should that get across the finish line.
An Opt to be cast after the Vivi, so the Vivi trigger is going to be on the stack, as will the Opt, as will 3 prowess triggers. So we'll see if David wants any of these things to resolve and what order they will be resolving. Clearly, David has some intention of responding to all of these triggers that are on the stack, as well as the Opt itself.
Yeah, whether it is a matter of bluffing or does indeed have something, this is a situation where David is essentially using the last of his resources, or pretty close to it.
Now, it'll be towards the tower that has been bargained to take care of the Vivi. And that's going to resolve. So now David will have the opportunity to scry.
And I believe he is technically alive here as things currently stand. He does have 2 blockers for 3 creatures that are all going to have 2 power, and he's at 3.
Well,
so
in this exact moment, that is true.
in this exact snapshot moment of time, David is alive and getting another turn.
We will see what comes after the opt from Tony after David finishes the scrying from the torch to the tower. So the scrying is done, and now the scrying from the opt.
And notably, Tony has not played a land, I believe, this turn. The previous turn, he did go stock up into the Flood Maw, so has the ability to play a land. And as we believe, any spell here should be able to push lethal across, including that Swift Spear in hand if there is a red source.
Well, at the very least, he can present lethal. Again, we don't know what's hiding in David's hand, so there could be some sort of interaction spell there. Who knows?
And it looks like 2 cards.
Now Tony's just going to pass the turn back. Okay, so David makes it out of this turn alive. Now it's time for him to untap and draw. Remember, he put the top card from the Torch, the Tower, Scry on the bottom, so this card that he's drawing is a mystery to everybody.
And
See, at
he's
least one.
sweating
Oh,
it.
I like a good sweat. A Shivan Reef?
I think that's 2 Shivan Reefs
Don't
and a
love
Spell
that.
Pierce.
It's nobody's favorite.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, that's definitely 2 Shivan Reefs and a Spell Pierce. Okay,
He'll
Tony
just pass
has
the turn back.
Swift Spear, unknown card. 4 creatures available.
Well, there's Swift Spear. Now this is a sleight of hand. That is a Spell Pierce. See if Tony wants to pay for this.
David, of course, trying to force Tony's mana here. Or saying,
Tony
you
says
have nothing.
Tony
but
says I won't pay. He'll say
Tony has it all.
I'll braid that. And how about a little of this? That's going to get the job done. Tony Portalon's going to break serve here. Taking a 2-1 lead in this Izzet Prowess mirror.
Yeah, really impressive stuff from Tony. I love, of course, how he's playing, but we are also seeing the impact, maybe, of that Monastery Swift Spear. If everybody is trying to play for a mid-range game plan and you have the cheaper creatures, you're only spending 1 mana on your threats versus 2, because there is a significant difference between having to pay 1 for a Swift Spear versus 2 for a Drake Catcher. So in a matchup where every bit of mana economy matters, when a turn from David Rude on turn 3 where he plays Dragecatcher and passes and doesn't use that remaining mana is a much bigger deal than you would normally imagine in Magic. This is a huge difference.
A little bit of a change in sideboarding here for David Rude. For this particular game, he has sideboarded out that copy of Twin Maw Stormbrood, a Monstrous Rage, and 2 Spell Pierces. And he has brought in 2 VVs, an additional copy of Stock Up. Remember, he boarded out 2 Stock Ups in Game 3, and then looks like he's boarded back in his copy of This Town Ain't Big Enough, or at least one of the copies of that card. So there is a difference between the play and the draw in the matchup, and you can see that he is shifting things depending on where his game begins. Meanwhile, Tony, no changes.
Right, and this is interesting because Tony broke serve the previous game, this is David significantly changing his sideboarding on 2 different games where he's on the play. So this is him saying, whatever my strategy was the previous game, perhaps whatever strategy I've been using throughout the weekend, he's changing it up. And you don't normally see a big change in philosophy like that from players. You say, okay, well, I think the conclusions I've come to previously for the matchup are sound, and I'm going to stick with them. So this is David changing philosophy entirely. Tony, of course, once again on the draw says, you know what, things worked out okay for me the previous game.
Well, we're going to see if this change of philosophy is going to work here for David, because there's multiple copies of Corey Steelcutter on the battlefield here for Tony. One of the main reasons that this deck was 40% of the standard metagame is the powerful red artifact. So can David actually overcome this sort of draw while being on the play? Because a lot of the times, we know these blue-red players, they want to get out on the front foot and then run downhill. David is doing anything but that at the moment. And I'm sure he would love to resolve this VV, but is that the right time for the very powerful legendary wizard?
VV is the way to try to overcome this draw. Obviously, a lot of the matchup that we've seen up to this point has been one-for-one exchange of removal in order to keep the board in check. Corey Steelcutter completely changes that dynamic because suddenly, if you have multiple of those out, you're making too many creatures that your opponent can't answer. That's that go wide mechanic. And David's hand, other than this VV, is a bunch of just single target interaction. So this VV is really going to need to do a lot of heavy lifting going further into the game in order to help David come back. And hopefully that copy of stock up that he boarded back in is going to play a role in that.
Well, here is VV. There's into the Flood Maul. VV will trigger, of course, to deal 1 damage over to Tony, and it will get a +1/+1 counter. Mana ability on the Wizard hasn't been used just yet, though I imagine David is thinking about it because of the Torch the Towers, plural, that are in hand. So Torch the Tower is going to take care of the other Monk token. Prowess trigger there on the Drake Hatcher. And of course, VV will get a little bit larger, which will put it out of a Braid and Torch the Tower range. And now here comes the Drake Hatcher looking to get 3 points of damage through. That Otter has no interest in blocking, so that'll work. And now here come the incubation counters.
Yeah, Tony had the choice to block with the Otter if he wanted to essentially trade the Otter for a potential Drake. But as things stand with cards in hand, opting just not to do that, let David have the incubation counters and say, I have 2 Corey Steelcutters. I'm now able to have a nice explosive turn here.
So it'll be a sleight of hand here. Corey Steelcutter is going to be the first card found there on the sleight of hand. The Torch the Tower was the other.
Yeah, so choices for Tony here, of course, is able to use Torch the Tower or the copy of a Braid to answer the Drake Hatcher on the board, but will need to combine both of them to deal with the VV at this point.
And I think that might actually be of interest. Getting the VV off the battlefield, of course, Tony has a copy of VV in hand, and you have to imagine knows just how powerful VV is once a player gets the opportunity to untap with it. So using 2 resources to take care of it, well, that's quite the decision, but that might be the one that he elects to make.
Yeah, taking care of it, yeah, just getting that off the board. But taking care of it is pretty appealing here, considering the game can get out of hand otherwise. So starting with this and then just knowing that you are able to have a big attack afterwards is very nicely appealing here.
And so now there's the Torch the Tower. So Vivi's going to bite the dust. Corey Steelcutters have generated monks. They're a little bit larger. Again, the dice represent the Prowess triggers, and now here they come.
Everything is large enough to attack through the Drake Hatcher now. David can make a Drake and double block something potentially if he really wants, but losing this Drake Hatcher, it is the last of his gas at this point. So that is a really rough situation for him.
It looks like David's going to take all of that damage now too. So now there is a Drake Hatcher making a 2/2 Drake. David's going to untap, copy a Torch the Tower in hand, maybe hoping that Tony's out of gas here. He certainly wants to draw something good. Going to sweat it out once again. I love this David Root. Let's go.
He comes from our era.
Yes,
you know? I mean, he's older than both of us in terms of time spent playing Magic, but very much the let's make it a show era.
That's what we're here to do.
It's not just about entertaining those at home. You're entertaining yourself.
Yeah,
the sweat is definitely about making sure that you're enjoying your time here.
Oh, table for one. That's what I say.
You know, we can see the Riverfire Verge. That is not going to do anything.
No.
Currently, Tony doesn't really have anything other than the board, so it's not like the game is just over, but it's pretty close, especially because there is a copy of Stormchaser's Talent there sitting on the board. So even if Tony was to draw a land here, that Stormchaser's Talent can go to level 2, get back a 1-mana spell, and then still a lot of trouble for David.
David going to play that Riverfire Verge, and simply pass the turn back. We know that Tony's battlefield's already pretty good. Drawing a copy of Stormchaser's Talent certainly isn't bad. And there's also the inevitability of Vivi in hand as well. And speak of the devil, and it shall appear. And there is the very powerful legendary wizard. Now there's a Stormchaser's Talent. This will be a pause for just a moment here from David.
Yeah, so on the stack currently is a Vivi trigger, 2 Corey Steelcutter triggers, I believe, and David with a Torch the Tower in hand thinking about what to do. As you see Tony getting everything ready, none of these things are there yet, but David has to do the math of whether he can afford to take how much of this. I don't believe he can be bargaining Torch the Tower to kill the VV in this spot,
Yeah.
it will likely have to just kill off an Otter. And that's essentially admitting defeat in no such terms.
More or less,
Yeah.
especially with the inevitability of the VV on the battlefield and the 2 copies of Storm Chaser's talent. David has just been overwhelmed in this particular game by Tony's draw. Multiple steel cutters, multiple talents, and just a very balanced Izzet Prowess draw.
Yeah, I think we're definitely seeing the aggression of Tony's build showing itself and how it can help in going wide in this matchup.
Well, there's that towards the tower. It has been bargained. Time to scry. Top card becomes the bottom. 40 steel cutters have triggered.
Couldn't bottom it fast enough.
Yep.
Fine. Yeah. You scry the top bottom.
Yeah, checking. David is at 9.
Everybody.
So these are 2. These are everything's 2.
Everything's two.
Everything is 2
Everything's
right now.
2.
Yeah.
So there's a block. Here's some damage.
David's at 1, I believe.
Yes, indeed.
And David is
Opting. Boom. Top card. Storm Chaser's talent.
oh, bottom.
Most likely.
You know what David needs is a fire magic that doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Mountain won't do it.
There's a mountain, and that is going to do it. Tony Portolan is going to win this game and match here over David Rude. The Izzet Prowess mirror goes to the group.